Hey, this is Mark Goldberg with the UN Affairs blog UN Dispatch.
And this is Matthew Lee from Inner City Press at the United Nations.
So Matthew, so we spoke before we went on air, and you're telling me that we are headed for a showdown at the Security Council.
Definitely, no. They're
all right. Take it from the top.
I'll take it from the top. We're recording this on Thursday, August 21st, and the whole, I guess war or back and forth conflict in Georgia has come to it's been at the Security Council since it started, but now there are these two competing resolutions. One put forward by France, but supported by the UK and the United States, which would just basically, it's 3 paragraphs, only 2 of which have any meaning, calling for a ceasefire and for Georgian troops to return to their barracks and Russian troops to return to where they were before the conflict started. Russia then came forward with its own resolution, which just mirrors the agreement that they reached with the French President Sarkozy when he was trying to, mediate. He went to Moscow and then he went to Tbilisi. And so Russia really likes that agreement, actually. And as we get into it, you'll see it's interesting. I think that France itself is a little bit queasy because they're now in a position of essentially opposing adopting the agreement reached by their president as a UN Security Council resolution. So it's kind of interesting.
That's it. Yeah, that's interesting. My understanding was that the so Sarkozy and Medvedev hammered out this agreement. And both liked it at the time, but then the French were sort of perhaps browbeat by the U.S. and the U.K. Into sort of backing away from it, but also because they also did so because the Russians didn't abide by the agreements of the ceasefire as well. They said they had the ceasefire, but then they didn't remove their troops or abide by its precepts. Is that your impression?
No. I mean, but it does seem that's in a way it seems like 2 separate things to say. I guess, and this sort of came out today. I actually think, and then I'll get back. I think that the way in which what Russia liked about Sarkozy's mediation is that in reaching this 6-point agreement, he did not make any reference to the quote territorial integrity of Georgia, meaning he said, you pull back, they'll pull back. You can establish a sort of a wider security area around the 2 breakaway zones, and then there will be discussions. Initially, it was discussions about the status and lasting security and stability arrangements for South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and that's what Russia agreed to on. It was August 12th, and they liked it, as you can imagine, because the word status in there makes it identical to what happened with Kosovo, which is discussions about status that ended up leading to the Declaration of Independence and in recognition by 45 and counting. Now I think Malta recognized it today. So from Russia's point of view, they stepping back even from their text, they believe that because Georgia tried to reclaim South Ossetia, again this is the Russian point of view, that the conflict was started by Russia trying to reclaim South Ossetia and killing civilians, etc. They reacted, and most people say overreacted. But they're saying because it tried to reclaim it, number one, the separatists will never want to go back with Georgia, and 2, they've lost the right to having this term territorial integrity in resolutions, and that everything's on the table. I'm sorry. I literally came back upstairs from this.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So why don't you set that scene actually?
Right. No. So downstairs. I mean, what happened? There's been a series of meetings about this where the French came forward with a resolution, and then Russia came forward with its resolution that they didn't really have a meeting about because they said they had only just seen it, even though it was the 6-point plan. So today a meeting was called, and nobody quite knew what it was about. There have been meetings at which Georgia called it, and they had a briefing saying, the Russians are still in the port of Poti, and here's what they're doing in the city of Gori. But this meeting was called, and we all, as reporters, hang around outside, sort of like, what's going on? And when they emerged, the European, we'll call them the Western, the ambassador of the UK spoke, then U.S. and then France. They were all pretty grim-faced and sort of said, Russia came and basically what they've done, this is kind of a technical thing, they've put their resolution into blue, meaning it's finalized and can be voted on as early as tomorrow. If the Russians put it to a vote tomorrow, it seems pretty clear the U.S. would veto it. And here's the weird thing. In any place except the UN, it's kind of, the real issue is, I think from the U.S. point of view, is why doesn't Russia pull its troops back, right? Yeah. Russia is sort of saying, they're behind the scenes, they're saying almost they don't have to pull back until this is a Security Council resolution. This sort of could be read between the lines today. They said, this hasn't been accepted by the Security Council yet. Why should we pull back?
Well, it's a chicken and egg.
Oh, it is.
Thing, right?
There's also the old question of there's 6 points. Are they all interrelated? Did they all have to take place at the same time? Nothing in it says Russia has to pull back and then it gets these other things. So I think, and I'm totally willing for you to disagree with this. I think that maybe that was the only way that President Sarkozy could get an agreement, was to leave these things loose. But all of the misunderstandings that have happened since this thing was supposedly agreed to, which I actually don't think there is an agreement, because if the two sides think agreeing to different things, it's not an agreement, right?
Right. But I mean, I think that's probably right. I mean, they may have announced an agreement, but in fact, there is no agreement, because it seems, at least, that the Russians didn't abide by sort of their promise for a ceasefire and for a pullback.
Well, ceasefire implies that they're still like shooting up the place, and I don't mean I'm not defending them. I'm saying I think the beef that I heard raised, at least here today, against them was that they haven't pulled their troops out of. And again, because I'm actually willing to, for purposes of this discussion, I'm going to not take the Russian side. Which, I mean, they're in front of the UN. There are all these Georgian protesters. I talked to them. They're very frightened about. Well, at least a few. When the bombs were falling, they were very frightened. I think today I was just outside. There was like 5 people, and I'm not saying that that's nothing, but it would seem that the level of sort of concern about bombs falling from the sky has gone down. But Russia's position, I'm not to be, Russia Today television or anything, was that an assault was launched on South Ossetia by Georgia from a nearby town called Gori, which has a big military base, actually right next to apartment buildings, right? Yeah. So their position on why it's taken them time to pull out is that they are disabling the Georgian military capability that launched the attack. Mm-hmm. And this, it seems like, by what right are they doing it? And there's been a lot of table thumping by the U.S. and the Western powers. And the analogy that Russia says, certainly behind the scenes, is to what NATO did to Serbia in 1999, which is that Serbia was acting badly, to put it mildly, in Kosovo, and NATO bombed not only Kosovo to get the Serbs out, but bombed Belgrade and other places in Serbia. So that's the kind of, now, admittedly, the level of harm, because the size of Shkin Valley is much smaller than Pristina or Kosovo, is less. But that's the analogy they use. What do you think of it?
I mean, from a Russian perspective, I think that you sum it up very well.
Right.
I think it
that's
makes
what
a
they
lot
pay
of
me
sense.
for, Mark. No, I'm just joking. No, but I'm saying that is their.
You are Russia.
No, but that is their argument.
Yeah.
And
it's compelling, but on the other hand,
go ahead.
You have sort of the sort of overreaction by Russia to the provocation by Georgia, and that, I think, is at least for me, my human rights loving self, seems to be sort of a lot of where the problem lies.
No,
now, that said, Human Rights Watch actually put out a pretty interesting report, I believe early this week, not assigning blame, but saying that both sides committed are alleged to have committed war crimes in the process of sort of fighting the skirmish. They accused sort of Georgians of firing indiscriminately into Shin Valley, and they also accused Russia of indiscriminate bombing attacks
and the use
as
of
well.
Cluster bombs, as well. But I think
and using cluster bombs. And interestingly, tangentially, I don't know if you saw this, but this week as well, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court announced that they are opening very preliminary investigations into alleged crimes in Georgia.
Right, I did see that, and we can get into the credibility of Mr. Moreno. Not the credibility. I think that from the outset, he's somebody that said, why are all his cases in Africa? And he said because in other places, including Colombia, he said specifically, he's found that the court system is addressing the problems. So I think I'll just predict to you from the outset, it's highly unlikely that his office will, in fact, it's even conceivable that they would prosecute, let's say, Georgian use of pretty big rockets at the city of Shkinvali, because he'll find that Georgia has a credible legal system. See what I mean?
Well,
no matter what he finds.
I actually, interestingly, I I picked up the damn phone, as they say, this week, and I spoke to someone, a lawyer who's working on this preliminary investigation that really is in its opening stages at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. And what this lawyer told me was that so this is sort of the first step, and what they do now is sort of go to some sources. They don't really do much investigating on the ground at this stage. They sort of will investigate, I think, probably using like NGO reports, media reports, their own sort of intelligence sources, the extent of sort of what they call the crime base, sort of what crimes actually committed, and then if they see that it sort of raises to a level of gravity warranting possible ICC intervention, perhaps sometime in the future, then they'll look at the things you're talking about, which is sort of complementarity, which is whether or not the Georgian system is able to handle it. Incidentally, Georgia is a party of the Rome Statute that created the court. Russia is not, but since Russians committed the crime on Georgian soil, this guy tells me they're technically under ICC jurisdiction. And it is a big if, and the guy I talked to said, admitted it's a big if. That there's not, it's like sort of no guarantee that there will be an ICC investigation, but it's sort of the first toe in the water.
Right, no, absolutely. But I guess I'm more skeptical. I'm going to say, if you know from the outset, I mean, somebody should ask Moreno Campo if he was here, because if in fact it's the position of his office that the Georgian legal system is credible, and I think that will be his position, it's almost a waste of resources for him to do the investigation if procedurally, if you look at it, even if he finds reasons to believe, at least on the Georgian side. Now, I think it's an open question of whether in reality, and also as a matter of the politics of that office, he would say from the outset the Russian system is not credible. See what I mean?
Yeah.
In which case, because I think, just so you know...
Well, no one would be sort of probably tried under the Russian system because none of the crimes technically happen on Russian soil. Is that right? No,
but if the crime took place in Georgia... No, absolutely. If the crimes took place in Georgia, it would be their position that they could prosecute them. Then they would look at whether or not Russia is a member, and it's not a member, it would look to see whether Russia itself is prosecuting the people that it thinks are guilty of war crimes. And if they're not, they could say, we're trying you. See what I mean? Or they could ask...
I don't think it's... I wouldn't call it sort of a waste of resources.
No. But here's what I'm saying. No, don't actually, but I'm willing to say that. If that court will only, in fact, go forward against perpetrators who have a legal system that they don't think is credible, it would actually make sense for the International Criminal Court to put out a list of countries sort of pre-screened as having credible legal systems. Do you see what I mean? Because otherwise it's grandstanding. I mean, I'm telling you, if in reality, I guess what would happen is that they would say, we've found a prima facie case, war crime. Let's just look for a moment at Georgia firing rockets into residential areas of Shin Valley, and there's pictures of it. It's not the Russians claim 2,000 died.
And listen,
I mean, there's like blown out, they're burned out apartment
Human Rights Watch put
totally. I mean, that happened.
I think that
doesn't mean
seems indisputed.
No, but I'm saying that if at most what they'd say is there's a prima facie case of possible war crimes by Georgia, but we believe the Georgian legal system is credible, therefore we choose not to prosecute. Just say that from the outset. You see what I mean? That's why I'm not trying to be... I mean, I'm sure it sounds cynical to you. I'm not saying, it's a waste to talk about the issues. I'm just saying it's very... Given that Moreno Campo has said we only go forward against countries that don't have a credible legal system. Do you see what I mean? What sense does it make to pretend to be doing the initial...
Instead of preliminarily investigating if a crime happened, the first thing they should do is investigate the legal system of the country in which
they know that their finding on the legal system is going to end their inquiry, regardless of how bad the crimes were. Do you see what I mean? Then
I think I would, I think even sort of well-equipped legal systems sometimes fail to prosecute people.
But here,
sorry, go on.
No. So, I guess what I'm saying is and this is what it actually made me think this when he said Colombia has a credible legal system, and that's something that Moreno Campo has said last time he was here at the UN as to why all 5 of his cases are in Africa, which is a growing. Again, I'm not trying. I just gave you the Russian point of view. Now I'm going to give you the third world, even Sudan point of view. But the point of view is that this as a fan of international justice and international criminal law, There are some concerns that all of the cases have been in Africa, and his
Right.
defense of that was that, for example, in Colombia they have a credible legal system. So he looked at it. He's concerned about it. He flies there from time to time. But
and incidentally, I think he's there as we speak.
oh, exactly. But he's only investigating one side of the conflict, which is the funders of the FARC. And I'm sure those are terrible people, and one of them apparently is the president of Venezuela. But that's the point. Is he's not saying he's already found that the Colombian legal system is credible. That's why he didn't bring a case. There's footage. I've seen a documentary. When last time he came with these guys making a documentary about the court in Moreno Campo, and they show him looking sort of very serious and brooding and meeting with Colombian prosecutors. He's, regardless of what paramilitaries supported by the past and maybe current Colombian government have done, since the Colombian legal system is deemed by him to be credible, he's not going to act against those crimes. See what I mean?
I think.
You see where I'm going with this?
I think the legal system is not deemed by him to be credible.
Deemed by who then?
I think it's a sort of a magistrate, a sort of pre-trial chamber.
Right.
That does the sort of credibility test. It's not
but then
something that's a part of his office. I think it's
I'm glad to have lured you into that, Mark, then, because
okay.
you've just...
I've been lured.
No, and here we go.
Where are you taking me?
Here's where I'm taking you. For all the sins of Sudan, and there are many and legion, recently, after he announced that he's seeking an arrest warrant against President al-Bashir of Sudan, right? And after then the Arab League went in and said, Sudan, you really should set up your own inquiry into Darfur. That's the solution for us in order to try to ask the Security Council to freeze this process against al-Bashir. You have to do this. Sudan named a special prosecutor to look into the crimes in Darfur. And almost immediately, Moreno Ocampo was quoted saying, this has no credibility. The only one that they'll look into are people that refuse to commit genocide. That's a direct quote by Moreno Ocampo. And so the question is, I'll even say this, that's probably true. But the question is, does it make any sense for him as the prosecutor to immediately prejudge a process that hasn't even started? Even if he thinks that it's a scam. Even if you and I both know it's a scam, I go back to who's supposed to determine if something is credible. Because you're saying...
I think, he's coming from the prosecutor's perspective, so he has a case to win. I think it's the judges who are a distinct entity from sort of the office of the prosecutor, who are the arbiters of whether or not.
But then, by what right
of complementarity, which is the fancy word for whether or not the ICC's jurisdiction kicks in.
But then, by what right does he speak? Does he speak and prejudge a process in Sudan without any vote by his magistrates?
Well,
he's emotional.
Well, I don't want to say that. I don't know him well enough to make those kind of judgments.
I'm going to say a couple more things.
I will say that he's I think like any prosecutor, if you look at
Rudy Giuliani, for example.
Rudy Giuliani. Any American prosecutor.
No, I know, but most people
does their grandstanding. They try to game. They do what they can to win their case.
But you know what's
so in Ocampo's situation, I think he's behaving like any other sort of prosecutor would.
But number one,
I'm
going to say people like you, just for the sake of argument. But
okay.
People like you, Mark, I don't think are big fans of Rudy Giuliani. I'm certainly not. I think it's nice to have an aggressive prosecutor, but there's such a thing as abuse of power. And
so
I know
maybe Giuliani is a bad.
I know that
example.
given
I would have used the former Elliot Spitzer.
Well, there's
example,
that muddies the waters. But I guess I'd just say
a few months ago,
it's hard to say that an office that actually hasn't yet convicted anyone, and this is true, is abusing its power because it has. But the point is, I don't know. I'll just say that, and it's weird. And there started to be articles, and nobody can really tell. Anyone thinks that anyone that criticizes Moreno Ocampo is just carrying water for Sudan. You basically have to choose, supposedly, between saying Moreno Ocampo is great and represents everything that's great about international criminal law, or somehow you're defending Sudan. But I'm going to say to you,
who says
there
that?
There are people that I've spoken to, and a number of them in the human rights NGO community, who say you're right that there's some problems. And one of the problems is, for example, Moreno Ocampo got his first case, which is against this guy Thomas Lubanga, a notorious East Congolese militia leader charged with recruiting child soldiers to kill others and be killed themselves.
Right.
This case has been suspended because Moreno Ocampo didn't share exculpatory evidence with the defense. Now, again, I was going to say, people like you, generally, if a prosecutor makes these it's two different ways. Number one, that doesn't meet the basics of due process. And number two, it's inept, right? It's incompetent. If you're prosecuting a notorious war criminal, don't screw up, right? How exculpatory could the evidence be when there's videotape of the guy getting 12-year-olds to march around with guns, right?
Right. Wasn't the specific case that you're referring to was what the sort of the exculpatory evidence in question? Correct me if I'm wrong. Was the fact that the prosecutor gleaned evidence that was sort of supposed to be gathered sort of in private?
No, but let's...
Or he made sort of maybe like a personal or a deal. His office made a deal with a witness who said it would be in private, but they needed to turn that in.
Maybe you can't do those.
You probably know the story.
No, but maybe you can't. I mean, it definitely raises a larger question, which is like.
Well, sorry, wait. Do you know?
I do know, and I do. I think what's happened, and the evidence in question comes from the UN's Department of Peacekeeping Operations, MONUC, and they believe. And I've actually spoke here. I'm too cheap to pick up a phone, but what's good about being at the UN is I just go downstairs and I've spoken to the people involved.
Okay.
And what they say, and this is hopefully this is interesting to you, they say they gave information to the ICC prosecutor's office. They thought it was very preliminary information. They didn't think it would be the basis of the indictment of Lubanga. So they thought they could get a confidentiality agreement because this wouldn't be the evidence that would be used to get the indictment. This was just initial hints and clues that then the prosecutor's office was supposed to then go out and get evidence and use that evidence for the indictment. And the people here, obviously off the record because they're not looking to get into a fight with the ICC, were, they say, shocked that the Office of Moreno Campo used what was preliminary hearsay information as the basis to indict Lubanga. And it's true, and I think you'll probably agree, whatever information you use to get the indictment, you've got to disclose. I think we'll both agree, people that are in Guantanamo Bay, when it comes time for them to get a trial, to say the evidence against you was confidential, we won't share it with you, that doesn't cut it. But it doesn't cut it even in the case of Lubanga, and I'm not a fan of Lubanga, but I'm also not a fan of sort of like Moreno Campo, like, you mean well, therefore we shouldn't say you made a mistake here, or, do you know what I mean? And I think...
well, I don't know who's saying he didn't make a mistake, though. Okay. Again, it was like, that sort of situation was, clearly didn't turn out well for the office of the prosecutor. Okay.
No, I don't want to be fighting with shadows. I know that maybe this is the unsaid presence in the room is, did you see, I don't know, it may have been during your Clinton Rwanda trip, but there was, Moreno Campo was ordered to pay, his office was ordered to pay some 200 and something thousand euros for retaliating against an employee. But it gets better. The retaliation came after the employee said that Moreno Campo raped a woman in Cape Town in 2005. And just rest assured, none of these things happen in real time. They may be coming out now that he's tried to indict Bashir, but the paper trail is all there, and I've seen the paper trail. And actually, it's on. I put it online, so it is what it is. I mean, there's been reporting on this. But so it's one of these things that I don't, again, and then you're going to say I don't want to raise it or not. I can lay it out. In a way, the charge of rape or sexual abuse is a little dubious because the victim, although at the time was taped saying that it happened, later said she didn't want to go forward. And the person who actually filed the complaint with the International Criminal Court was somebody working in Moreno Ocampo's office who had a tape of that tape. You see what I mean? But the judges ended up saying, look, if the victim is not proceeding, what are we supposed to do? Although, in other places, like, for example, in New York City, if the police believe abuse has taken place, it doesn't matter if the, victim doesn't want to go forward. The police can bring their own complaint. So anyway, so that happened, but as soon as...
So, wait, so you're saying he was accused of rape?
Absolutely, yes. He was accused... The ILO has, in the decision awarding damages to the person that Moreno Campo filed, the ILO has said the evidence is clear that he took the journalist's car keys and said, if you want your keys, you have to sleep with me. Now that, again, that's why I want to be clear. The allegation is not that he used a date rape drug or used a baseball bat, but this is, whatever. But the thing, I think so the issue then becomes, I don't think he committed a crime. You know what I mean? It's gray zone, And I think that even people that worked for him knew it was gray, and actually that's why they taped the alleged victim. That's why there was sort of a kind of a damage control went in. But the question arises, and I think if you look into it, you'll find it was a gray enough zone that it would be fair for state parties and also just fans of international justice generally to say, given high stakes, right, when you're charging presidents of countries with war crimes, when in turn these presidents can throw out whole peacekeeping missions, not that the prosecutor be a saint, but probably to be engaged in conduct that's even in a gray zone next to rape and sexual abuse, is probably not a good thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So do you think he should be replaced?
I think you're gonna. I think at least the idea that the problem now becomes if this is raised, and it has, you can find in papers in both the UK, South Africa, the idea being raised by academics that are experts and fans of international law. The problem is now it becomes, in a way, I mean, here's the ultimate conspiracy theory, that faced with concerns about both his behavior and his track record, for example, in the Lubanga case, that he took it up a notch and filed charges against Bashir because it makes it almost impossible to remove him. Because to remove him means that you're a supporter of Bashir, right? I'm not saying. I'm saying
you're like, again, like this. I've never heard this.
Go ahead.
Like,
well, I don't.
This.
Go online. Not just go online.
Pretty close, I guess, to this human rights NGO community that you say is saying this, and not once have I heard that formulation. That either you are, that if you're against the ICC, you are, or if you're against you somehow,
right.
Sort of this system, you are pro Bashir. Even sort of, even folks who, who raise sort of, I think, legitimate and understandable concerns about sort of the ICC's investigation and the decision of the prosecutor to make moves to indict Bashir. Say Alex DeWall, right?
Sure.
He's a big Sudan expert. You can't call him pro Bashir.
No. Oh, absolutely.
He makes sort of he makes sort of his argument against why he thinks this indictment was a bad idea. I don't think that makes him on the side of
no,
of
definitely.
And you're just sort of making this sort of straw character.
No. Okay, no. It's not. I want to be very clear. I may be making a straw character, but it's a smaller character than the one that I should have made this clear. I'm saying, and I've heard this from many people, not that if you question the indictment of Bashir, the actual action taken, seeking the arrest warrant of Bashir, right? I'm saying there are people that say, okay, there are problems with Ocampo, but to raise those at this time only helps Bashir. Therefore, and serves to bring into question this beautiful organ of international justice. Somebody actually in the recent 10-year anniversary called it the best creation of humanity, which is going a little far. But that's what. So I'm talking about not the opposition of questioning the decision to indict Bashir. I'm saying the idea is somehow if you question Moreno Ocampo on the grounds that I've just laid out, not the indictment of Bashir, these other things, that is bad for international justice, and therefore it's better to just sort of suck it up and let him serve out his term, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking. I'm
still having one of those people
right now in my mind. The ICC sort of in comparison, say to the ICTY and the Rwanda Tribunal, and looking back on those, in their early years, both I think made significant sort of mistakes. And sort of learned from those mistakes early on. I think the ICTY, too soon after it was created, decided to hand down indictments, and they handed down indictments for pretty low-level people that would never sort of today be even considered for indictment by the ICTY. They were sort of, they had a bunch of judges sitting around and nothing to do. And I think, to its credit, the ICC took, didn't sort of start immediately throwing down indictments. It took them a few years before they started. And their first indictment was against Joseph Kony in Uganda. In Rwanda, it seems they had the opposite problem. They sort of tried to go after too many people with too few resources.
And probably.
So I think both. I think both courts and now the ICC. I think a lot of it is maybe growing pains. Are really young.
Right.
They don't. That there's not a lot. There's not much guidance for these kind
No,
of
but I
things.
mean, you don't need guidance.
So I think I'm not
Right.
I'm not talking about the personal
Sure.
stuff, or I should say the personnel stuff that you were talking about. I'm talking about the
sure.
like the Lubanga thing
Right.
that you alluded to. Yeah, it just seems like it's part of the process, and it's not a reason to scrap.
Oh no! I
idea.
don't. I mean, I guess I am. I'm talking about this prosecutor. I'm not talking about the court generally. And I'm sure that whatever issues there are about. I mean, right before he resigned or retired or left, the head of the UN's legal office, Nicholas Michel, held a press conference. So that was, I don't know, last couple of weeks. And I mean, there is this question of he's the one that he had a letter delivered to the ICC. Talking about this evidence and saying that the judges could see it, quote, in camera, you know what I mean, like in a closed room, but they couldn't take notes. But this way, this supposedly confidential information that had been given by the Department of Peacekeeping Operations could be seen, but not by the defense. Do you see what I mean? So he's very involved in this delicate negotiation. So then the question arises, how much, and this is, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying it's a question, how much of Moreno Ocampo's cases in Sudan are using evidence provided by either UNMISS or UNAMID, the Darfur peacekeeping mission. See what I mean? If in the Congo, the peacekeeping mission admittedly shared information with the ICC, probably most of us would say that's they're going after these warlords, and so they see the evidence and they pass it on, but they don't want to be fingered, so it's confidential, so they can't share it, so the case is thrown out. The question then becomes, how unreasonable is it for a person, and I say it in quotes, like Bashir, if he's indicted by a sitting on evidence produced in large part or in some part by a UN peacekeeping mission in the country, to say, get the hell out? Do you see what I mean? And who in the UN system decides?
It's a tough. I mean, it's a tough position because you want internationals to be working towards international justice.
No, it's tough, but you have to make a decision.
This is the only this is the only sort of chance and opportunity that the victims of the conflict in Darfur will get for justice. I'm wondering maybe if in our remaining.
Oh, okay, no, I didn't plan that we go off on that route, but I thought I know that you know a lot about it. We can sort of take it around, but
I'll go for that ride.
No, this Georgia thing.
So I want to know sort of Musharraf resigned this week, and in the halls of the UN there is sort of a larger than life character, the Pakistani UN ambassador.
He's been nowhere to be seen.
And he's been nowhere to be seen. Huh?
Yeah, no, absolutely. He's maybe it's the summer doldrums, or they're not on the Security Council. But there's been number one. It definitely there's a big lull at the UN in August. I hadn't really seen it before, but Ban Ki-moon was on vacation. There's no head of peacekeeping right now. It's sort of unfortunate that as happened actually with Lebanon, Israel, but that there's a war during this vacation month. But beyond Munir Akram not being here. Oh, I actually have a funny story to follow. I think, that's probably shooting too high, but about ambassadors that have been here. But the UN sort of non-reaction. I mean, in various noon briefings, there was like, "What's the comment on?" And they said, "We don't comment on the resignation of political leaders." Right? I mean, obviously, it's a big event in the world in terms of in the same way. Also, like for example, this issue of the U.S. citing the missile shield in Poland. It's a huge issue, but it's just not a UN issue. So it's like I've gotten calls like, "What do you think of it?" And that's fine. But like in terms of the UN, like if you were to ask like, "What does Ban Ki-moon think of the missiles in Poland?" It's like, sorry, next question.
He has no opinion on this.
But this is just the funny way that like Mauritania, there was a coup. That's not the funny part.
Yes.
But there was a coup. It was a bloodless coup, they call it. Some journalists were locked up, but there was definitely a democratically elected government was overthrown by military force.
Yes.
And so the UN, it took the Security Council 2 weeks to condemn it. In part, this may be the summer lull. The sponsors of the presidential statement that condemned it, the United States, said they thought it would look better to go after the AU and other regional bodies condemn the coup, which they all did. And so then they passed the thing. But here was the funniest thing: the day that they passed this, I thought this was funny. The presidential statement, which is very strong, it says we deplore the coup, we demand the immediate restoration of the elected government, which is not going to happen. But they said all the right things. But at that meeting, which is an open meeting of the Security Council, the ambassador of Mauritania speaks, and he says, this had to be done. it's actually a very popular coup. 2/3 of the mayors support it.
So this was the guy that used to work for the deposed president?
Not only did he used to work for the deposed president, he in his speech he said, and yes, the deposed president was our first democratically elected leader, in many years, and before that we had nothing but dictators. The guy's CV shows that he's represented Mauritania at the UN in 1982. Under the what he now calls dictators. So this was all everyone got. I mean, in a way, it maybe.
So this guy is just like the permanent.
Well, he says he represents. Yeah,
permanent representative.
Exactly. He represents Mauritania.
He'll represent his country's interest no matter
well,
what.
I asked him it directly, and he said, "I represent Mauritania." But it's sort of interesting because he definitely puts the gloss on whoever is in power, but. And the funny thing is, you'd think like
now you know why he's had his job for so long.
Exactly. I guess. Well, he knows how to denounce whoever was used to be in power, and not the current ones. But this was like, and actually, no one was. The president of the Security Council this month is Belgian. He was like, "We diplomats, we have a way of landing on our feet," or But it was really like this guy is like he permanently. And I think that what they said is that and again, I don't mean to make light of a coup. It just was sort of as a UN matter. So I guess I just want to, because I don't want to leave. I mean, there was sort of the Sturm and Drang about this Georgia thing, but there really seems to be. I mean, I've seen it during this whole conflict. I'm sure you've seen it as well. Like CNN, Fox, BBC. Like it seemed to me that if you see and maybe, I don't know if this is true. Maybe our blogging heads crew is looking at Russia Today, Al Jazeera English, but it's very much portrayed as like. Russia invaded Georgia. Russia, the new, the rearmed bear won't leave.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to be said for that, right?
Sure.
But I mean,
no.
Go ahead. I mean, number one, it seems like the origin, not the origin, but like you called it a Georgian provocation. It seems.
I think that's like indisputable, right? I mean,
no, but is it a provocation if you fire rockets at apartment blocks and then seek to reclaim an area that's governed itself for 15 years? Is that a provocation, or is that like an aggression? Is that an act that I mean, I guess Russia's thing is that it didn't like go to NATO because it's not a member of NATO, right? It didn't get any blessing for its response. But from its point of view, I mean, again, I don't equate the Russian quote peacekeepers in South Ossetia with UNAMID, but they are an internationally. Certainly in Abkhazia, they're in fact recognized by the UN as peacekeepers. But in South Ossetia by the OSCE, this was what Georgia agreed to. They agreed to a peacekeeping force in these breakaway regions, right? Yeah. That included almost all Russia.
Sorry, I mean, it seems one of the problems of that agreement was that the peacekeepers weren't really international peacekeepers. One wonders if there were a bunch of Spaniards there, whether they would have gotten shot at. Or what would have happened, or if they could have been served as a buffer. It seems that if there to the extent that there's going to be sort of an international or a peacekeeping in quotes presence, in South Ossetia and Abkhazia, they should not be this time soldiers. From
I don't think that's going to. I mean, the power politics here is Russia's not going to Russia and to the degree that it matters, but apparently it matters to people. It mattered to people in Kosovo. I don't think if you held a referendum of the people living in Abkhazia and South Ossetia that they would change the composition of the peacekeeping force. And I mean, you could say I have no basis to say that, and then the Georgians would say that's true because there was actually an election and referendum in South Ossetia, and by a high percentage people said we want to break away, and they elected a president. Now Georgia says the election was illegitimate because there's been ethnic cleansing, much of it 15 years ago, and that's also probably true, right? At the same token, like I mean, I hate to be accused to be pro-Serb, but like now it's true. There's no question if you have they have elections in Kosovo that it was wildly to become independent. I think even the international UN, U.S. admit there were Serbs that lived in Kosovo that left and never returned, and maybe it was untenable to return. These things happen.
There are many.
But I guess so. Yeah. But looking, I think. This is I don't know what's going to happen on like if they call. Apparently, right now there's two resolutions. If the French call a vote on theirs, which they haven't even started the clock on, Russia would veto. If the Russians tomorrow, which they could now, call a vote on their resolution, U.S. has said it would veto. Maybe they'll play chicken and come up with some compromise. But I guess the real the real kind of there's a disagreement about where the Russian quote peacekeepers can be in the country. They claim,
Yeah.
Russia said today, they have accepted the idea that they're going to go back to those two areas and to like a few kilometers around it. But the overarching issue seems to be this now is going to set off these talks about the, quote, lasting security and stability arrangements. And basically, the U.S., Condi Rice, George Bush, and Saakashvili, they've said it is not on the table as part of those negotiations that these areas could break away. The territorial integrity of Georgia is invaluable. That's it.
Yeah.
And the question becomes, so then...
That was the Russian line on Kosovo.
Right, if you're a
of course.
separatist, it's not talks if that's not on the table, right?
Yeah.
And Russia, and again, I guess I just want to nail. It seems that when Sarkozy went to Moscow, he led Russia to believe, by leaving out territorial integrity and by including a paragraph that included status and putting his name on it, that he was saying to Russia, in exchange for you stopping destroying Georgia, you get these talks with the possibility of the two areas breaking away. And it's on that basis that Russia stopped. Once they stopped, there was this call made while Condi Rice was in Tbilisi. There was a call to the president of Russia saying, do you mind dropping the word status? This came out this week. And he said, we can drop the word status because lasting security and stability obviously also includes the possibility of breaking away, if that's the only way for security, right?
Yeah.
But and even in that, there was no territorial integrity. Now, Georgia, the U.S., they basically are saying, but of course, we never implied that these areas could break away. But I think that was very much implied. You see what I mean? I guess I don't know. I guess I'm sort of. I mean, so that's too rhetorical a question. But do you think that should be on the table? You personally?
It seems, me personally, it seems so. On the one hand, you have to look at it from a Russian perspective, where clearly, you have the Kosovo precedent.
Right.
At the same time, my sort of main sort of concerns, personally,
Sure.
are for whatever ethnic minority is left in whatever territory is, in whatever country that these regions end up in. I'm worried, mainly for sort of on human rights
Sure.
issues and what's going to become. Are we going to see sort of ethnic cleansing? Already, you see signs of ethnic Georgians fleeing South Ossetia, and also you had a lot of ethnic sort of Russians fleeing South Ossetia as well, going towards Russia early on. So you see sort of. I mean, that's sort of the most troubling part of this to me is sort of the humanitarian consequence. Sure. And to its credit, the United States is sending in help. The World Food Program and a lot of the UN agencies are also flying in aid. But you need to create a sense of security for ethnic minorities, and that I think should be sort of our, as sort of good human beings, overall sort of goal here.
Right. No. I mean, I don't disagree.
Yeah.
I guess the idea becomes. Under which scenario, under which status, remaining.
Yeah.
These have been autonomous, but de facto, but owned by Georgia for the last 15 years. But it hasn't really gone that well. It could obviously go worse, but there's no question that it hasn't gone well. There's been no trend toward these areas expressing a desire to reunite with Georgia. There's been constant shooting across the dividing line. There's been the downing of drones. There's been a series of small but routine emergencies, and then there was this. Yeah. So then the question becomes, and I don't know how it turns out, but it seems to me to say from the outset that we're concerned about humanitarianism and humanitarian issues and ethnic cleansing, and therefore we know that the one thing that can't happen as part of a discussion of these issues is to break away. It doesn't seem intellectually honest. I don't know if that's the best way, but if the concern is what's best for the people in the area, then probably that has to be on the table, especially in light of the president of Kosovo. But just generally, it seems like it's almost like they want to make a point and I guess in one sense you can look at the UN and say, of course the UN supports sovereignty and territorial integrity. Like every country here is concerned about that. Whether they're dictatorships or not, no one wants to lose territory, right?
Right.
At the same time, I think there's a whole other way to look at this, which is like self-determination, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's sort of those are kind of the big. Right? No, exactly. And those are
no. Listen, you raised. I think these are I sort of don't have a good answer either way. Like I said, I think sort of our primary concern should be humanitarian, but the eventual status of South Ossetia. It's clearly sort of. I guess one of my concerns, I guess, of maybe conceding South Ossetia to Russia is sort of, again, what kind of precedent that sets. What sort of ethnic majority Russian enclaves in Ukraine are there? I do not know. I really, I'm
there's
not
Transnistria, that's for sure. Moldova.
Yeah, or Transnistria, right? Yeah.
No, absolutely. Moldova. But I mean, I think.
No, I mean, so it's. That's certainly problematic.
But this was also I mean, I will not to be it's not certainly not to you. I told you so. But the reality is at the time of the Kosovo Declaration of Unilateral Independence and very much favored, timed by, immediately recognized most of the EU and the United States. It was inevitable to claim that was no precedent, wouldn't create any precedent. Was just not on it. It clearly it did. And so then somebody has to explain why. That I'm sure there must be an argument out there, and it could just be that the Serbs acted so much worse toward Kosovo. Then that has to be defined. Russia was throwing around figures. They were saying, if there's 100,000 South Ossetians and 2,000 were killed, which is not true, and 30,000 fled, which is true, is that how does that? No. I mean, I have to.
I'm saying who here in Washington, some folks sort of did predict this.
Right.
I might mess up his name, but I believe Nicholas Gvozdiev, who's I think is it the national interest or the American interest, one of the two, and we'll put up the link.
Oh no, definitely, let's do that. No, I know that there are many pundits. There are many pundits. I'm saying the actual countries and their foreign policy. I'll say here they never admitted it. The term they used repeatedly was sui generis. This is a one-off.
Right.
There's no parallel, and it's like there's a that again. That doesn't. I don't know what it means, but it does mean. I think that sometimes the sort of moral righteousness, or the other thing here, and again, this is going to put me maybe to the left of you or not, is to have the U.S. Sort of unselfconsciously saying. We do not accept regime change, and then they threw in the word in Europe, because I mean literally a lot of this is without saying anything about what Russia's act, but it's highly ironic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, there is a lot of irony. It's too much. There's too much tragedy.
No, exactly. And I don't mean to say that it's funny.
There's a lot of irony when you look at this sort of dispassionately from a geopolitical.
Right, and I think, but again, I mean, I guess anyway, I don't know exactly how. I guess how this and the other thing is obviously what would the world community if Russia? It looks like they're sort of like thumbing their nose at the world, like they signed it, but the 6 points never said when they exactly had to pull out by, and now they're sort of implying that the agreement doesn't become operative until it's enacted by the Security Council, which means that if the U.S. vetoes it, maybe Russia likes that and says it gives us more time,
Exactly. Back to the chicken and egg.
No.
Until so we'll probably revisit this in a couple weeks. I'd be curious to see. So again, what this is. So you are predicting, Matthew. We're taping us on Thursday. Sure. Likely tomorrow on Friday.
I want to be.
Will be a potential.
Since this is the if
potential showdown.
What it is, I mean, and then this being the UN. It's not even to hedge my bets. I'm really not. I'm Russia by quote putting it into blue, and this is like a reference back to like the old days of the UN where they would actually put blue ink to paper and say this is the final draft. They've started a clock that they can call a vote tomorrow late afternoon. If they were to do it, I can say.
So this will probably go on the air Saturday or Sunday. Any predictions?
I don't think they'll call it. I think actually maybe they'll pull a rabbit out of a hat, call a meeting as if they're going to vote on this draft, which the U.S. would veto, and then engage in many hours of negotiation and somehow square the circle, which is the French ambassador said. We are diplomats. That we are paid to do that, squaring the circle. Find some way to Right. But the only thing is, I think, and this is what the one thing I'll say here is that everyone's going to claim victory when they didn't. I mean, if you watch President Bush and Condi Rice, they're like, we will never give in on territorial integrity, never. And they're certainly not going to get any resolution with that in the way they would want it. So the question becomes, and that's always the weird thing, is you have all this and literally, I think if you listen to President Bush, you think that the demand is that Russia out of Georgia. I mean, that's not just the slogan. He says Russia needs to get out of Georgia. But that's not even on the table. The U.S. is not actually even asking. So that I think, right? They're not asking for Russia to leave Georgia. They've acknowledged, as they have for the last 15 years, that Russian peacekeepers remain in these two areas. So it's weird to have this drum beating. And I understand that things always get it's not a question of simplifying. I don't want to put it that way. But it's kind of, it's so strange, and it'll be the same thing on the resolution. They'll say, we demanded territorial integrity. Probably what they'll get is some oblique reference to past resolutions that themselves refer to that. You know what I mean?
And in the meantime, we'll keep you in the office all week.
All right, yeah. No, hopefully, no. I don't even mean. Actually, I'm not flip about that. Things happen. We gotta,
No. We need folks covering it. Thanks, Matthew. So we'll talk again in a few weeks.
Okay, great. Okay.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.